Hello, brothers and sisters. The topic today, light and limited duty denial grievances. Now, it's a lengthy topic, and I'm going to try to be as concise as I can with it. It's much like in Article 8. I'll say you have to put the pieces back together again. We could say kind of like a Humpty Dumpty grievance. But how does this start? It starts by management suddenly taking the position there is no more work available for a particular employee or employees. Either work they've already been doing, limited or light duty work, or maybe it's an employee that's never been injured before. Management's trying to teach them a lesson. So they deny the limited or light duty right away. The good thing is the contract is on our side. The law is on our side. The ELM, the EL 505, all the handbooks and manuals. Chapter 5 of the OWCP law, section CA of the CA 810, section 5-6, which is an iteration of the FECA law, the Federal Employees Compensation Act. Also, section 10.507 of the Federal Register, parts 11 and 20 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Also parts 10 and 25. So the U.S. Code, the actual federal law, is on the side of injured employees. EL Handbook 505, Chapter 4.5, the EL 505 states, when an employee is not totally disabled or has partially overcome the injury or disability, the USPS must make every effort to assign the employee to limited duty consistent with the employee's work limitation tolerances. National Pre-Arbitration Decision Q1N4Q C07190177, resolved on June 18, 2009, also confirmed that the Postal Service had not developed a new criteria for assigning limited duty and that injured employees would continue to be assigned limited duty in accordance with the requirements of ELM 546 and 5 CFR Part 353. What does this all mean? And why am I titling this training Light and Limited Duty together? Aren't they different? Well, it means that no matter what the Postal Service calls it, whether it's the NRP, which this national decision addressed when they were saying that this work is no longer efficient, no longer productive, that national decision said no, there is no new criteria. You must still assign the work in accordance with the law and the ELM. So whether they call it the NRP, the 10-year plan, a DeJoy-ism, it is and will continue to be a violation of the contract and federal law. Now, light duty is also available to those injured on the job. Did you know that? So we can see that it's really the same thing as limited duty, but without the legal backing of the Department of Labor. So all of the strategies we're going to discuss today, all of the arguments are really interchangeable, whether the injury occurred on the job or off the job. One of the main differences is that to obtain light duty, you have to request it in writing, while there is no such requirement for obtaining limited duty, and it's automatically supposed to be provided. So, we are our letter carriers, get injured on the job. We expect management to fulfill their contractual and legal obligations in good faith, don't we? But, as we know, that doesn't always happen. What can we do? Well, if we are sent home, first of all, we should fill out a PS Form 3971. If it is within the first 45 days from the date of injury, we're entitled for a on-the-job injury to something called continuation of pay for the first 45 days after the calendar day of the injury. And of course, we will request this in writing, because remember, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, for up to 8 and 40 hours a week of this special pay. What if it's beyond 45 days? Or perhaps our claim hasn't been approved yet, so management is saying, well, it's not limited duty, it's light duty, we can send you home. Well, we will request LWOP code 049 if it's outside of the 45 days, and put in a CA7 for compensation from the Department of Labor. If our claim has not been approved yet, of course, we are going to file a grievance. And that is what I'm going to talk to you about today. See, many times, you and I both know, we see the work on the workroom floor that's available to these limited or light duty carriers. Many of the times, management themselves is doing this work when it really should be done by carriers with medical limitations. So what do we request? Let's go over the documentation requests for this type of grievance. First of all, you guessed it, clock rings. We request clock rings for everything. I'd like to request the last 6 months from the date of injury and back, and then also to present, to the day I'm filing the grievance. I'm going to go over the list, and then we're going to explain why each item is requested. So number 1, clock rings. Number 2, medical documentation, if any, management is relying on to deny light and limited duty. Number 3, work searches, if any, management conducted within the office. Number 4, work searches, if any, management conducted within the local commuting area. Number 5, all emails from local management daily to all post offices in the local commuting area inquiring of the limited duties available and the daily response, if any. Number 6, copy of all data that was reviewed by the deciding official and or relied on by management to withdraw or not provide limited duty. Number 7, any notice to the injured worker advising him or her of the withdrawal of limited duty. And number 8, any and all duties management considered modifying in order to accommodate the grievance restrictions. Number 1 is self-explanatory. What has the letter carrier been doing? What are they doing now? Number 2, it's also self-explanatory. It's the medical, isn't it? We can't have limited or light duty without medical, so if management refuses to provide it to us, that makes our entire case. Then you should be giving this person 8 hours. They have no restrictions. Now, with number 2, though, the medical restrictions are also important when we receive them because as letter carriers, we all have intimate knowledge of what biomechanical movements are required every day. We have lists we can receive, perhaps from our branch, or even online, of what are the duties of a letter carrier. We know what it takes to case and carry. We can use that knowledge, our own personal knowledge, to argue that even with these restrictions, these letter carriers could still, for example, carry for 2 hours or case multiple routes, so on and so forth. So that's the importance of the medical limitations. Number 3, now these are the in-local office work searches, which we will be able to compare to the ELM pecking order. And we're going to pause explaining the request right now to go into that. What is the ELM pecking order? Well, it's found in ELM chapter 5, 540 to be exact. And it's an order in which management must provide work. Let's summarize it. Within the employee's craft is first. In the work facility to which the employee is regularly assigned and during the hours when the employee regularly works. If they can't find any work there, they may look for work, other work outside of the craft within that facility. If none is found, they can look for work outside the employee's regular schedule. All reasonable efforts, however, must be made to assign the employee to limited duty within the employee's craft and to keep the hours of limited duty as close as possible to the employee's regular schedule. If none can be found there, they can look for limited duty outside of the work facility to which the employee is normally assigned, only if there is not adequate work available within the employee's work limitation tolerances at the employee's facility. In such instances, every effort must be made to assign the employee to work within the employee's craft within the employee's regular schedule and as near as possible to the regular work facility to which the employee is normally assigned. Now, this pecking order is also found in Handbook EL 505, which further breaks it down into 5 steps. And we're going to go over those. I will also post a copy of this pecking order in the comment section of this video. So first, it says they have to look for within the craft, within the tour, within the facility. That's number 1. Number 2, outside the craft, within the tour, within the facility. Number 3, within the craft, outside the tour, within the facility. Number 4, outside the craft, outside the tour, within the facility. That's number 4. Number 5, within the craft, within the tour, outside of the facility. Number 6, outside the craft, within the tour, outside of the facility. Number 7, within the craft, outside the tour, outside of the facility. And number 8, everything outside. The last step where they need to look is outside the craft, outside the tour, and outside of that person's post office or facility where they normally work. Management cannot skip steps. So, for example, this prevents them from being punitive and perhaps saying, okay, well, here's some janitorial duties that you need to do now, when that person could be casing mail. So management must follow this pecking order. As we can see, it's very specific, and it protects the employee from arbitrary assignments. So let's continue. Item number 4, the work searches. Item 4 and 5, the work searches inside or outside the office. So that's very important. If there are none, that makes our case. And sometimes management uses this sheet called the priority assignment worksheet, which they have to fill out in accordance with this ELM pecking order. Now, it's a local form used in a lot of districts. I'm not sure if it's used nationwide, but perhaps it is in yours, and you'll be able to request that as well. And number 6, a catch-all request, all data that was reviewed in making the decision. Now, this is going to help us to be able to lock management in, and it prevents them from being able to fabricate documents and fabricate information later on in order to justify the denial of limited duty, for example, at the Formal A itself, which sounds like a good future class, doesn't it? How to do a Formal A meeting. Number 7, what does that help us do? The notice to the employee denying the limited or light duty, it helps in the event the employee has to fill out a CA7 and there's a question as to why they're not working because management said there's no work available. And in light duty, it also establishes a violation of Article 13, where they are supposed to, in writing, explain why light duty is not available as well. So we want to request that as well. And number 8, digging a little deeper here, all duties management considered modifying. Well, usually they haven't considered modifying anything. So that will help our case tremendously. So you've submitted this request. Let's pretend you have a conscientious, responsive, and responsible supervisor, and they provide you most, if not all, of this information you have requested. We have the medical. What do we want to do with it? First of all, we have to protect it. We are custodians of it, so we want to keep it in a private place where it's not going to be viewed by other employees. But you'll want to look at the medical carefully, at least from 2 angles. First, exactly what the carrier cannot do with these restrictions. Now, something to keep in mind, and this is something management is using lately with the outrageous work hours, is that an employee may get a restriction that says they are restricted to working only 8 hours or 10 hours or even 12 hours, believe it or not, per day. And management wants to say, well, then you need to request limited light duty. No. Since there are no biomechanical restrictions involved in these types of medical restrictions, the carrier does not need to request light duty. Why? All assignments are contractually supposed to be as close to 8 hours anyway. So why am I required to be able to work 12 hours in order to work a regular assignment? This is the subject of a different grievance. When management requests this, we're not going to comply. We're going to file that grievance as it is just a speed-up attempt by management because now they can't work this employee crazy hours. We're actually following what it says here at Handbook EL 505, Chapter 6.2 by looking at the medical restrictions from these two angles. What the carrier can't do and also what the carrier would be able to do with these restrictions. Handbook EL 505, Chapter 6.2 states, review the medical evidence and address the following. Whether the medical findings indicate the employee is capable of returning to either full or limited duty. If capable for full duty, immediately return the employee to his or her regular position. If capable for limited duty, arrange for a limited duty assignment if the employee is already on limited duty. Determine if the medical findings indicate if the restrictions have been either increased or decreased, and if so, change the employee's limited duty assignment accordingly. Now, one thing I like of this is that it talks about the regular position. That is the limited duty that management must start with first. What on their own bid assignment would they be able to do? And that is also in compliance with ELM 546. So they can't just take them off their route arbitrarily and say, well, your limited duty is now to go case these other routes in the morning and not case your assignment because they want to, assign a CCA or a PTF to do the whole thing because it would be faster. Again, it would be more efficient. No, we should file a grievance on that. The first limited duty would be on the employee's regular position if they have one. So this training today is actually for these types of medical restrictions that we've talked about with actual biomechanical restrictions. Just because you're too slow and you have restrictions that you can't work more than 10 hours, again, not going to happen. I have a carrier who's really slow, 62 years old. Management has tried to write him up repeatedly and has failed miserably each time. You cannot get written up for being slow. So let's say these restrictions say the employee can't lift more than 10 pounds or can't walk or stand more than 2 hours. What letter carrier duties can they do? Can you think of any? Well, they would be able to case, can't they? Yes. They'd be able to pull down their route. They'd be able to arrange the parcels, case the SPRs. They might even be able to deliver for an hour or more, especially on mounted, dismount routes. Perhaps they'd be able to deliver late arriving express mail. And you can probably think of more carrier duties that they could do. Now, what non-carrier duties could they do? Well, they could answer phones. They could update the red books, the edit sheets. They could help customers at the counter locate notified packages. They could update the PS Form 3849 with the forward stickers. They could drive swings out to carriers. Even with these pretty severe restrictions we've discussed, as you can see, management could still find at least 3 hours of letter carrier duties and maybe 4 hours of non-letter carrier duties for these employees. Almost a full day, isn't it? Now, what can't they do with those restrictions? The example we said, 10 pounds and walking, standing no more than 2 hours. Well, they couldn't park and loop routes, right? Because you have to be able to carry at least 35 pounds in the satchel. Management could probably limit their street duties to 2 to 3 hours, even if we could argue that they don't have to walk it continuously. And there's something else to consider. Do the restrictions say that they cannot do something continuously, but are they still able to do these activities intermittently? So as you can see, the duties management has to provide, of course, will be restriction-based. But here I'm just trying to give you some ideas of what you can argue. Apply your knowledge of the letter carrier duties to these restrictions and try to find the most duties that the letter carrier could do. Now, what if these restrictions don't allow for any letter carrier duties, not even casing? Maybe it's a lifting above the shoulder restriction or a grasping and fine manipulation restriction, which is necessary for casing. Are you ready for this? we can always argue management should have given them the duties of a lobby director. What is a lobby director, you say? Well, according to the Postal Operations Manual, it is an actual bid assignment in the clerk craft. And according to the Elm pecking order, once management reaches that step in the pecking order, they can certainly and have not only the legal, not only the contractual, but the legal obligation to provide this work to the letter carriers. So chapter 125.4 explains all of the duties of a lobby director, and they're all pretty light. Pretty light. Also remember that we would argue management has the obligation not only to look for the lobby director duties in their office, but within the local commuting area. All offices within 50 miles, management should have provided, if nothing else, these lobby director duties to the employees. Do you think you'll be able to find some or all duties of these duties available for your injured letter carriers? Basically, if they can stand up, walk around intermittently for at least 2 hours a day, there is absolutely no excuse for management not to offer them limited or light duty. Now, recent arbitrations by arbitrators currently on our panel, such as arbitrator Jonathan Manat, have recognized that efficiency does not override the obligations of Elm 546. So management cannot hide behind the excuse that this would be inefficient. So that is a reason not to provide the limited duty. That is key. Efficiency does not override the contractual and legal obligations of providing limited duty. Thus, the lobby director argument. Another point to keep in mind is that Elm 546 requires management to offer as much letter carrier duties to the injured employee as their medical limitations will allow. Remember that? Elm 546, together with Chapter 6.2 of the EL 505 handbook, where it says put them on their assignment. So management cannot skip steps. Once again, cannot skip steps, taking them completely, for example, off letter carrier duties, trying to make them be custodians right off the bat because they're trying to be punitive when that carrier could actually case or do some letter carrier duties. Doesn't matter if management thinks it's inefficient. Skipping steps in the pecking order is an easily winnable grievance as well. We want to preserve the dignity to our fellow injured letter carriers. In fact, arbitrator J. Manat even went a step further, unequivocally stating that management must contact other offices in the local community area in accordance with Elm 546 pecking order and make every effort to offer as much work possible, and these searches must be completed daily. Daily. So remember, we asked for the daily communications with offices in the local commuting area where the office where the person is actively searching for limited duty work every day. They can't just say, well, we searched, there was nothing available. No. They have to show proof that they searched daily. And this is in accordance with decisions, arbitration decisions, cigar numbers C28958, and then again C30031. So these are very strong contractual and legal requirements. You know, it irks me when I hear carriers say, I got injured, I've been off for months or years, the union never helped me. There are so many protections against that, brothers and sisters. So let's improve in this. Don't forget about your LMOU. Many LMOUs have language requiring management to provide light and or limited duty, as well as listing, defining, and prioritizing that light duty to be within the craft. See, there's no pecking order for light duty in the national agreement, but some LMOUs have a pecking order similar to the Elm 546 pecking order. Now, what can we say about the federal law? How does that protect injured employees? 20 CFR 10507 points B and C states the following. If the employee can perform restricted or limited duties, the employer should determine whether such duties are available or whether an existing job can be modified. If so, the employer shall advise the employee in writing of the duties, their physical requirements, and availability. And C, the employer must make any job offer in writing. However, the employer may make a job offer verbally as long as it provides the job offer to the employee in writing within 2 business days of the verbal job offer. Now, management also misses this time limit frequently. We can file a grievance and therefore get past decisions where we find management in violation of federal regulations and ELM 546, which would be very useful in future violations of ELM 546, where now we can say management has a history of violating these provisions. Our argument becomes much stronger as now it also includes Article 15. So, according to this federal regulation where management has to modify duties, are we saying that if a carrier was allowed a push cart, they would be able to still do the park and loop portions on their route? Yes. And management hates having to provide any extra equipment, as we know, especially push carts. Why? It makes the delivery slower. So what? Arbitrators say that is not a factor in the responsibility, contractual obligation to provide limited duty. Or what if somebody else loaded the trays for the carrier that has a lifting requirement onto the LLV tray so that they could deliver the driving portions of their route? Absolutely. See, now we're thinking. Now we're getting ideas of how management can modify existing jobs in order to still provide work to these injured employees. And it is their obligation. So, a good question we could ask management, why haven't you accommodated the carrier by modifying such and such existing job? You can probably think of a lot of different scenarios in your office where modification to the letter carrier job could result in some hours of limited duty being provided. Again, this is a legal requirement per the Code of Federal Regulations. Now let's get into the interview. What questions could we ask management in the investigation of this grievance? Although each case will be a little different based on the restrictions, there are a set of general questions we can ask. Number 1, we could ask, why wasn't the carrier provided with limited duty beginning on such and such date and sent home, allegedly with no work available within his or her medical restrictions? Number 2, why wasn't the carrier given casing and preparing routes for delivery duty? Number 3, why wasn't the carrier given mounted delivery sections? Number 4, why wasn't the carrier given lobby host duties? Number 5, what duties, if any, did you consider modifying for the carrier in order to comply with Code of Federal Regulations 20, Chapter 10.507, which we just read? Number 6, did you give the carrier any other instructions or suggestions as to what he or she could do in order to continue working once they presented these medical restrictions to you? If not, why not? Number 7, why wasn't the carrier given the duties of blocking mail? Number 8, how do his medical restrictions prevent him from, for example, and whatever this is that you find they could have done, blocking mail, delivering mounted routes, express mail? You want management to have to explain their interpretation of how that employee's medical restrictions affect his ability to complete the job of the letter carrier. Many of the time they won't be able to articulate it, and if they do try, we lock them into answers, and now that is their official position, again making it harder for management to make new arguments later in the process, as we can point back to that interview question and say, hey, wait a minute, when I asked you this, you said it was because of this. And that would be one of our arguments if we were to have to appeal this case to Step B. Number 9. Did you discuss your decision with the manager or postmaster prior to sending the grievant home with no work available? What did they say? Number 10. Have you discussed your decision to continue to keep the carrier at home with the manager or postmaster? Number 11. This is after you've met, if you're interviewing them after, which is a good idea. When we met at Informal A, you stated there was no work available for the grievant within his limitations. Is that still your opinion, and why? And remember, we can interview them before and after, and even at the Formal A meeting itself. That is, all of those steps allow us for the ability to build the file before it goes to Step B. And number 12, where is the list of duties or job assignments management considered both locally and within the local commuting area prior to sending the carrier home? Of course, there's going to be variations of these questions depending on the restrictions or situations that you may know of unique to your office. Now, you can rest assured, arbitrators such as arbitrator Bernstein, Aaron, Dobransky, Doss, Francis, Lang, Barker, Freitas, Abernathy, Britton, and 2 arbitrators currently on our panel, Manat and Levac, all agree with this interpretation of ELM 546 and management's continuing and daily contractual obligations to search for and provide limited duty work. Now that we've touched on that, let's touch a little bit on light duty, since there's just a slight variation there. Although we're going to go through the same scenario, we're going to go through the same questions, we're going to request the same information, obviously without the ELM 546 portion and without the search outside of the office portion of our grievance for limited duty. But outside of that, everything else is going to be the same. Although there is no pecking order, again, unless there's one in your LMOU regarding light duty, here is what the language of Article 13.2cc states, found on page 13.4 of the JCAM. Installation heads shall show the greatest consideration for full-time, regular, or part-time flexible employees requiring light duty or other assignments, giving each request careful attention, and reassign such employees to the extent possible in the employee's office. When a request is refused, the installation head shall notify the concerned employee in writing, stating the reasons for the inability to reassign the employee. The JCAM explanation of this language states, Article 13.2c requires that installation heads make a bona fide effort to identify light duty work. It further requires management to give the matter the greatest consideration and careful attention. If management does not provide the requested light duty work, it has an obligation to explain in writing why light duty work is unavailable. Disputes concerning the failure to provide light duty work may be addressed through the grievance arbitration procedure. A decision I got once in my office by arbitrator Lumley, who is also currently on our panel regarding light duty, cigar number 28666-A. He actually ordered a make-whole remedy due to the bad faith and egregious way management had denied light duty to a carrier in my area, and agreed management was to provide light duty even if they had to reduce transitional or non-career employee hours in order to provide up to 8 hours of work to a light duty employee. He also decisioned that the written explanations are necessary not just when a request for light duty is denied completely, but also when management doesn't give them 8 hours. So they had to write a letter to this carrier any and every time they worked or less than 8 hours on light duty. It wasn't limited duty, but light duty, an injury off the job. Imagine the kind of holes we can poke in that when management tries to explain every day why they can't provide the 8 hours, when we can see the work that's being done, sometimes by supervisors themselves on the workroom floor, that should be done by light duty employees. And of course, there's very strong language regarding rehabilitation assignments, which are also backed by the Rehabilitation Act in the EL 307, Handbook EL 307. Well, brothers and sisters, now you have an idea of how to get started on these limited and light duty grievances, whether the injury is work-related or not. Of course, there are many details involved in the processing of these grievances I've not been able to address. I didn't want to have to make a 3 or 4 hour video. So please feel free to ask me any and all questions in the comments of this video. You can also private message me on Facebook. And please follow me on the YouTube channel, NALC Steward Academy. Don't let management get away with anything, brothers and sisters, especially when it comes to their obviously trying to pass the buck in providing limited and or light duty to our fellow brothers and sisters that have been injured. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm only trying to help you. In solidarity, brothers and sisters of the NALC, I thank you for your time and attention.